Welcome to the fifth installment of the Convocation Apollon interview series hosted by Berea College. My name is Molly Harris. I'm the editor of Apollon and coordinator of the interview series. Today we're speaking with Leonard, director of the Story of Stuff project.
I'm Christina Carter. I'm majoring in psychology and I'm a freshman at Berea College.
My name is Frances Berkins. I'm studying sustainable agriculture and Spanish here at Berea College. And I believe I'll start with the first question, which I'm curious about where you receive the most flack or the most criticism or weakness in your arguments. And you can take that question however it's appropriate for you. I'm not necessarily looking for an answer. I'm just curious to see what your response is.
Well, first of all, I really welcome the flack and the criticism and even the attacks that we get. And the reason I welcome it is I think we've got some real problems in this country with how we make and use and throw away stuff. And I would much rather people be arguing about it than ignoring it like we've done for the last 50 years while we got into this mess. So if someone wants to argue about it, I say, bring it on. Let's have that discussion. The more the better. I don't get a lot of critiques about the actual facts, partly because I really footnote myself well. My book has pages and pages of footnotes, and every film I make has a footnoted, annotated script. More of the complaints around a couple of things. One is that some people say that I'm anti-American, which I think is a very curious thing. I love my country, and I think my country's in problem. We really have a problem. If you look at all kinds of indices, from environmental sustainability to literacy to infant death mortality to obesity to depression, like on a whole bunch of fronts, our country is not doing well, and then the trajectory is not good. And so I think actually pointing that out and saying we could do better is a way to honor and tribute and pay my tribute to this country. If you look at for example, the National Happy Planet Index that ranks different countries on how well they're doing in terms of life expectancy and resource use, a whole bunch of things. Out of 143 countries, America, or the United States, ranks 114th. Now, I think the best way to honor us is say, let's do better. I don't want to sit here and go, woohoo, we're number 114, baby, we rock. That would be betraying our country. Or sometimes I feel like if we're on a ship and that ship is moving in the wrong direction or maybe even sinking, and you point that out, aren't you a friend of the ship? So that's one area of critique, is that I'm anti-American, anti-the United States, which I think is odd. The other real area of critique that we've gotten is around what the role of the government is in making in our economy and in our society. There are some people that believe the government should get out of the way, each on their own, pull yourself up by the bootstrap. It's sort of part of the American mythology, is that we all take care of ourselves, and rugged individualism. I believe that we have a government to solve problems that are too big to solve on our own. Things like disruption of the global climate, things like disappearance of huge stocks of marine resources in the ocean, things like toxic chemicals in everybody's body. Those are problems that are too big to solve on an individual level. So I think the government has a very, very important role in helping to make sure our products are safe, our judicial system is fair, the economy is fair. Just like you need rules in sports, just like you need rules on the highway, we need rules in our economy, and I welcome the government's role in that. Some people disagree, so I'd say that's probably the area around which we've gotten the most controversy.
You place a lot of emphasis on educating people and making them aware, and I think that is important. But do you think that is going to change the consumerist Western lifestyle that we have? Do you think that it will change it quickly enough?
Actually, I don't think education is the key. I think education is important, but what's much more important is getting involved in our democracy, is engaging as active citizens. If you look at the data about how many people care about the environment, which is first of all an odd question, like this is that which sustains life, and you care about it or not, but whatever. If you look at the data,
as if it's a choice.
How many people care about the environment? Actually, I was getting some new glasses the other day, and the woman at the glasses place asked me what I did for a living. I think she wanted to know, what am I looking at all day? And so I said, I protect the environment. And she looked at me and she said, oh, I like the environment. And I said, it's not vanilla ice cream. What do you mean, like the environment? But in any case, if you look at the data about how many people care about the environment, it's the vast majority of people out there. It's about, depending on which poll you look at, about 70% of people sympathize with the environment or have some sense of affection or respect for the environment. I am less concerned about educating the remaining 30% rather than working with that 70% to get involved in making change. Because 70% is enough a percentage of the population that we can make some really big positive change. So education is important, but I think the education we need right now is about how to be active citizens in our democracy so that our democracy really can be of the people, by the people, and for the people. It's that kind of citizen education we need at this point.
Do you see the story of stuff as showing people ways in which they can engage and ways in which they can make that difference and change that consumerist lifestyle?
Well, when I first made the original film, The Story of Stuff, I just wanted to spark conversation. I just wanted people to just start thinking a little bit more critically about the role of stuff in our life. You know, we are bombarded with messages telling us that the more stuff we have, the happier we will be, the more popular we will be, the better loved we will be, the more successful we will be. And I just wanted to put a different perspective out there just to get people to start just thinking a little more critically. And I was shocked and thrilled by the amazing response the film has got. So I said, I guess we're ready to have this conversation. You know, it really was not just a marginalized, fringed conversation. We were just inundated with letters from all over the world. I mean, all across the political spectrum, across the age group, the culture group. I mean, it's just fascinating. Recently, there was in 1 month, I was interviewed in a feminist, anti-imperialist magazine from the Philippines and in Martha Stewart magazine. Like, we have got this huge spectrum of people that want to have this conversation. So I feel like we can sort of move away from the education about how bad the problem is, because people know that now, and move more into the education of what we can do about it. So every one of our films, since The Story of Stuff, we link with nonprofit organizations that are working on the issues that we address. We've made The Story of Bottled Water, which looks at manufactured demand, you know, how companies got us to pay 2,000 times more for something that you could get for virtually free.
An excellent video.
Oh, thank you. So we made The Story of Bottled Water. We made The Story of Cosmetics, which looks at toxic chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
We've made The Story of Electronics, which looks at why our electronics are loaded with hazards and designed for the dump. And we just made The Story of Citizens United v. FEC, which is about corporate control in our democracy. And in each one of those, we partnered with really excellent organizations. So right on the website, right after you see the movie, there's action ideas, there's more information, there's opportunities to get involved. Because we don't want to just educate people and leave them there. We want to inspire people to take action and then help them plug in to take meaningful action. Yeah, I'm not a filmmaker, I'm a world changer. So filmmaking is just a tool.
I have a question. I heard one environmentalist describe her attitudes towards bringing people together to act as her not caring how you got to the party, but just caring that you're at the party. And I thought that was a really great way to describe, because usually people get caught up in the reasons why you care about something. And I want to know why you got to the party.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting distinction. I used to want to intellectually convince every single person to agree with me so that after you change their heart and mind, then they would change their behavior. We don't have time anymore. So at this point, I just want to change their behavior. I don't even care why. If it's because it's illegal or because they care or whatever, we just really need to figure out how to live on this planet sustainably. I actually got... I came to the party because I got really interested in garbage. I went to college in New York City where there are just piles of garbage everywhere. It's amazing. Like, you walk down the street and there are shoulder-high piles of garbage everywhere. And I just was so curious about this. So I started opening up the bags to see what was in there, because I just thought, this is weird. What is all this stuff? And I saw that it was almost all paper. And I grew up with a lot of hiking and camping, a lot of time in the forest. And I was like, wait a minute, this is what our trees are being cut down for, is to make this garbage? And then I wondered, where does the garbage go? Why is it gone? It's there every morning when I walked to college, and when I came home from college, it was gone. So I went to a landfill, and it really was a life-changing moment for me. And I really recommend everyone goes to a landfill. So I stood there as a sophomore in college, and I looked out, and as far as I could see was waste. You know, furniture and appliances and books and food and clothes and shoes. It was just stunning. And I realized right then and there that we had two big problems, that we had built an economy on an unsustainable flow of materials, and that it was a secret. So I vowed, I'm going to figure this out, and I'm going to tell everybody what I figured out. So that's what I'm doing.
So I'm curious. I do a lot of work with the farmers market and with value-added food production, and so it's something that I'm really geeky about. And I am always debating on how to convey what I'm doing to people, and for them to see that it's important, but for them to want it as well for themselves, not just because I do what I do. And so there's so many tools like, there's market-based advertising where you can use the market with various subsidies and so on to make things cheaper, inspire people to buy things because it makes economic sense or because you have really good advertising. Or I'm just curious what your perspective is for the difference between small scale and then national scale production.
Well, I do think that this is an all-hands-on-deck situation, and we need to try every single thing we can. So, I mean, do you mean, is it better to try to intervene at the small scale or the big scale? Is that what you mean?
Well, I guess the struggle for me is comprehending how to change people's behavior. Mm-hmm. And so that's something I think about a lot, and something that nobody really has an answer for. But
so I think there's a lot of ways that we can work to change behavior. I mean, one is exposing the true impacts. You know, if a lot of people saw the dumps in China where our thrown away cell phones go, and saw the kids picking through the dumps and trying to pull out the valuable materials, and saw the kind of environmental and health and justice problems, I think that kind of stuff, you know, seeing firsthand the impacts can help slow down some of our destructive behavior. But I also I don't actually think trying to influence the individual behavior is the most strategic leverage point, and for a few reasons. One is that it's exhausting, and you turn into a nag, and people stop inviting you to parties and wanting to hang out with you because you're like no fun. But another thing is it often the environmentally preferable option is more expensive, is not available, mm-hmm. It takes longer. I mean, I live across the bay from San Francisco, and it is faster and cheaper for me to drive in than to take public transportation.
Yes.
So that is a flaw. We cannot expect everybody to act against their economic self-interest, you know, take longer, bear the extra burden of doing the environmentally correct thing indefinitely. But what we're really asking people to do then is get better at swimming against the current. I would rather change the current, so that doing the right thing becomes the new default. So that even people too busy or too clueless or too tired, mm-hmm. or whatever to care are still doing the right thing. Because
so where do you think we should change the current?
I think we need changes in our economic rules and in our policies. So, for example, I mean, my expertise is toxic chemicals. Rather than, you know, go around and convince everybody before you buy a shampoo, look online on the Skin Deep database and figure out which shampoo is less toxic and take your list to the store. Rather than expecting everybody to do that, just get the toxics out of the shampoo. There should not be a toxic shampoo option in the store. You know, the places to intervene are not in the marketplace or in the individual behavior, but in the halls of governance and in the halls of business where these decisions are being made. That way, you know, the onus won't be on us. Rather than nagging our friends to ride their bikes, even if you have to go on the highway, which is scary, get bike lanes. Get subsidies away from fossil fuels and towards mass transit. We need to change the rules of the game so that the safer, more healthy, more fair thing becomes the easier, cheaper, more available thing. Then we don't have to incessantly nag everybody forever.
I had a question about the position of developing nations in environmental conditions. I'm from a developing nation, and I know that some people, while they are concerned about environmental matters and they know that that is important, at the same time there's an argument that the West had their turn and they ransacked it, and now they're ahead, they're economically stable, and they're socially more advanced or more privileged because of this, and so now it's the third world's turn to do what they have to do to catch up and to get to that position. How do you fight against that attitude, and how do you maintain equality and be fair, but then at the same time be environmentally safe?
Well, I think there's a lot of moral validity to that argument. You know, we've shut down all trees, and we go down to Brazil and say you can't chop down yours. Or, you know, each family here consumes as much as an entire African village, and then we go to Africa and say you guys are having too many babies. Yeah. You know, so there's some real validity to that argument. The problem is the you did it so we get to do it too path is going to drive us off an ecological cliff. And so we, in the industrialized country that really have reaped the benefit of trashing the planet, including many resources that we extracted from other places, the onus is really on us to work with developing countries to leapfrog over the whole dirty industrial development process. So rather than, well, you got to build all these coal-powered plants, so we can too, let's instead just skip that whole 40 years of dirty industrial development that ended us up with climate change and a toxic body burden in everybody on the planet. Let's instead invest in clean, green technologies. And in many parts of the so-called developing countries, you already see great innovations happening in green technologies because we know that's where the future is. But I do think that there is a deep moral obligation on us in the richest countries, especially the former colonial ones who extracted all that wealth from other countries, for us to help lead the way in reducing our own consumption and in supporting these countries from which we extracted resources for so long and extracted wealth from so long, to really help invest in clean and green solutions. Absolutely.
Do you have examples of practical ways? Because it's easy to say we need to invest, but what are practical ways in which the U.S. does that, or other Western countries are doing that? Do you have any examples?
Well, if you look at, for example, development aid. European countries and the United States, we give other countries different kinds of development aid. The United States does it largely through the U.S. Agency for International Development and things like the World Bank. So we're giving this money supposedly out of the goodness of our heart for charity, right, to help these poor third world countries that we trashed develop. But too often that development aid is tied to obsolete, dirty, polluting industries. So with that money that they're borrowing, so often they have to pay it back anyway, they're then tied into buying products from the donor country. So that often includes coal-fired power plants. It includes new roads and ports where they're often not needed. It includes garbage incinerators. It includes all kinds of dirty industrial development. I'd say let's put some very strict green criteria onto money that we give to other countries so that it's used to support that transition as fast as possible so that they can have energy and good food and all the things that everybody should have in the world. We shouldn't give them a choice between poison and poverty, that you either can live in your mud hut and be poor or take our nuclear power plant. There actually is a better way. So I think international development aid is a great thing. I also think more appropriate trade around extraction. I mean, right now we are just still robbing so many countries dry from taking out minerals, water, oil, all kinds of things. We need to give much fairer payments and just to be a more fair trading partner with countries so that it's not so exploitative, so that we can help countries develop. Have you heard about this thing, the resource curse? Yeah. It's so interesting. The resource curse is this weird thing in economics that it's hard to fully understand, but many of those communities and countries that are blessed with the greatest resources are the poorest, from Appalachia to Ogoni in Nigeria. So why is that while these regions are providing the country or the world with such incredible resources, why are they so poor? And that we need to say that is intolerable. We need to take care of these places from which we're extracting this stuff. Make sure that wealth stays locally and is, invest in that community there. But I do think with international development aid, it has been too often really a destructive force and is being used to actually pave the way to export products and technologies that we don't want anymore. And we've got to stop doing that. If a waste incinerator is too dirty for us here, it's too dirty for Indians, it's too dirty for Bangladeshis, it's too dirty for anywhere. We've got to stop exporting our dirty technologies we don't want anymore under the guise of aid.
I have a question about international frameworking for environmental issues. I've studied international law, and we studied Kyoto and sort of the precedent for Kyoto and Montreal, ways in which the entire world has basically reached consensus and solved problems very quickly through international legislation, except the United States, of course, has not ratified Kyoto, or China, and they are the greatest defenders. So I'm wondering, could you speak a little bit about the ways that international grassroots and NGOs are working together to address and build consciousness about getting these very important legislations ratified?
Yeah, I think there still is definitely a role for these kind of international treaties and international agreements, and I know some people are anti-UN and say there's no role for it. I mean, there are, just like we need a government because there are some problems that are too big to solve as individuals, there are some problems that are too big to solve as countries, especially when there's such uneven power among different countries. So I think there's a big role, and I think that works most effectively when there are vibrant, global, democratic citizen movements to hold our governments accountable. And in the world of waste and toxics, which is my world, we've had some great examples like the Basel Convention. The Basel Convention is a United Nations convention that outlaws international waste trafficking, and it was absolutely instigated and created by activists who are concerned about rich countries dumping their toxic waste on third world countries. It's a great convention. It's a great organization that works on that called BAN, BAN.org, because it's the Basel Action Network. And like other agreements, the United States is the only industrialized Western country that has not yet ratified the Basel Convention. So there's a great opportunity for more citizen action there. There's also a POPs convention that looks at persistent organic pollutant chemicals that is still being strengthened as we talk. That is also a wonderful convention. And again, in that case, it's because there were global citizens movements involved. And the internet has made it so much easier to do this. When I first started organizing internationally, we had fax machines, and you fax to the one group in Manila that had a fax, and it would take like 40 minutes for your 4 pages of fax to go through, and then they'd have to photocopy it and go make drop-off copies at everybody's office in Manila who was part of the conversation. And now with the internet, which we need to remember not everyone has, so we can't limit our conversations to the internet, but more and more people do have access, it is so much easier to share information, develop strategies, and engage globally. And we cannot count on business leaders or governments alone to take leadership. We absolutely have to hold them accountable through global citizen activism. It's the only thing that actually gives me hope that we can actually turn things around. I think there are technical solutions to the problems that we have, but it is companies have proven unwilling to voluntarily do it all themselves, so we have got to get active in making them do the absolute best, cleanest technologies available, nationally and internationally, through these international agreements.
One thing I'm curious about is the use of green technologies and appropriate technologies, and how it is obviously a very good thing that these are really starting to kick off, but at the same time there's a lot of question as to the mercury or lead or other toxic chemicals used to make these technologies.
Yeah, I think that one of the things...
Yes. I'm Dr. Roberts.
Oh, thank you. Definitely we need cleaner, greener technologies, but we also need to have a really vibrant discussion about what does that mean. Mm-hmm. What is a cleaner, greener technology?
What is actually infinite?
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
the constant ongoing conversation to make sure that we're not just replacing one hazard with another hazard, or to make sure that we're not benefiting one community over another. So, one of the issues that I work on a lot on is garbage and plastic waste. And so there's a big drive now about bioplastics, of using agricultural material for plastics. And obviously making stuff from plants is better than making it from oil. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But if we're taking crops that could feed people and we're turning them into single-use disposable, subsidized, that we're paying with our taxpayers, and then we're making single-use disposable salad containers to use for 45 seconds, that's not real progress. Yeah. So we need together to figure out what are the criteria to know if we're moving in the right direction. And those criteria have to be environmental, they also have to be health, and they also have to be social. We have to look at what are the impacts on people in all stages of the life cycle of that technology, and make sure that all those issues are addressed. And so I'm thrilled for the greater awareness about green technology, and there's some super cool things happening that I love. But there's also a bunch of greenwash or maybe well-intentioned, maybe not, things that are not really helping, but that are painted green. So we need to be really careful for that. So we just need to be clear on what kind of world do we want, and is this technology moving us forward there or perpetuating the flawed logic that got us into this mess?
Another question I had, you mentioned in your talk, and it was something I was going to ask you, about the perception that, we're doing all this for fun, but we're not even having fun doing it. Often that perception isn't given to other countries, so they think, the U.S. is the way to go, that's what everyone wants to be. That's where everyone wants to get to. How can we help to propagate the image that, no, we are not having that much fun?
Well, we can magnify voices, like in the Story of Stuff. When I made that film, I was basically figuring a U.S. audience would watch it. The film it's 20 minutes. It's actually based on a 45-minute lecture that I give, and the 45-minute lecture has a lot more international stuff, but we just couldn't fit it into 20 minutes. So we said, well, we'll take out the international part because the problem is the greatest in the U.S. I was stunned how much it is being used around the world. I just met somebody who works in the education department in Papua New Guinea who said they're using it in schools in Papua New Guinea. And I said, now how is this relevant to you in Papua New Guinea? And he said, because our young people are bombarded with messages that the way to greater happiness is through this Western-style hyper-consumption. Mm-hmm. And so it's really great to have a voice from within that world saying, no, it's not actually working. So I think it's great to magnify the voices that say that. Too often we export our media through our media, we export this really false image of what life is like. There have been interesting studies about the more U.S. media you watch, the higher you estimate the average salary to be in the United States. You generally estimate that people are richer, whiter, thinner, more beautiful, and have nicer houses than actually people have. And so then, by contrast, you feel inadequate because, look at, they're rich and white and beautiful and thin. And so it really is perpetuating a very destructive image of what life is really like here. So it's important to just have more critical discussions about it. And it's interesting, I've worked internationally for 20 years, and I've worked to fight the export of hazardous waste to other countries. I've worked to fight the export of dirty technologies that we didn't want anymore to other countries. I've worked to fight the export of banned products. Like, there are certain pesticides that we still manufacture in the U.S., even though they're too dangerous to use here, but we still allow them to be exported. But I think of all these hazards that we export, the most hazardous thing we export is this consumer-crazed model of organizing a society. And it's very interesting to see the impacts in a lot of other countries, because of course it's enticing, and it'd be impossible for me to go to some Philippine village where people are living in a mud hut and saying, no, you really don't want an iPod. That'd be impossible. Of course it is enticing, but you can begin to see some of the social erosion that's happening, that already people are beginning to see this is not the right way. I was in Hungary last year, and I was asking what some of the differences were since economic liberalization and globalization really took in. This one guy pointed up to this giant apartment building, and he told me that before, each floor of this apartment building had one television, and so all the neighbors would come together to watch the one television, and he said they couldn't agree with what they wanted to watch, so they'd always fight and argue and end up turning the TV off, and then play board games and talk and stuff. And he said now every single apartment has its own television. And so in a way that's progress, you can watch what you want, but he said, but people aren't talking to each other anymore. So they're already beginning to realize there is a cost to this hyper-consumption, hyper-individualism. So how can we not just amplify the critical voices from within, but also really amplify the incredible things that other cultures have that keep that social fabric alive? Don't let that get lost in the hubbub.
Do you have any more questions?
Thank you guys so much for having me. Berea is so great. I really feel so excited to be here.
It's a great place.
Thank you for coming. I watched your video before I ever moved to the States, and
where are you from?
It was awesome. I was born and raised in Brazil.
Do you know Brazil is one of our highest countries of watching this per capita?
Really?
It's so interesting from an international perspective that, the U.S. is the biggest, and then after that, this is so interesting, the three big per capita greatest views are Brazil, Israel, and Turkey.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, but tons of people in
really
Brazil
wild.
watch it. It's all in Portuguese, and we have a big fan base down there.
Awesome.
Cool. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
And you guys, keep up the good work.